Buying an iPhone in 2026 should be simple, but somehow it is not. Apple sells way too many models. Carriers push the most expensive ones, and while everyone is trying to offer you a good deal, you might be wondering, maybe a used Pro model would be better? So in this video I want to make it clear which iPhones you should skip, which ones actually make sense, and what is the safest pick for almost everyone. Let's start with the phones you should avoid, because cutting out the bad options makes everything a lot easier. And the first in the chopping block is the iPhone Air. This is a very specific kind of phone. It's not really about being the best phone for most. It's more of a design flex. Yes, it is thin and it does feel cool in the hand for the first couple of days, but after the novelty wears off, you are left with a very expensive phone that is mostly defined by the fact that it's thin, despite Apple marketing and pricing it as something in between the base model and the Pro, which it is not. Trust me, I've used it as my daily phone. So if you care even a little about value for money, this is not the phone you should be looking at. But the truth is, people who really want the iPhone Air will buy it anyway. You know who you are. But for the rest, I simply cannot recommend it. Then we have the 15, 16 and 16e. These are some of the cheaper non-Pro iPhones from older generations that Apple or your carrier might still push in 2026, but you should absolutely avoid them. Let's go one by one. When it comes to the 15, it pretty much came out outdated because it's worse than the 14 Pro in pretty much every single metric, quite literally. It has a worse chip, worse camera, worse display, worse materials, and worse battery life, which are all things that actually matter in the day-to-day use. So if anyone is offering you one on a deal, it's pretty much because they're clearing up stock. And as far as used goes, I wouldn't buy one either, unless you can get one for sub 300, because used comes with its own downsides. Though if you've already got one, I'd use it for another year or two, but I probably wouldn't update it to iOS 26. Next, the 16e. And let's start with the fact that it's not really a phone for the end user. It's more of a company type phone that you get handed out for work-related tasks. And that's on purpose. They're priced way too high and offer way too little to be valuable for an end user, but it's still an iPhone and it's the cheapest one you can get. So companies will just buy them in bulk, and it's how Apple makes a profit off them. That's why I wouldn't buy one under any circumstance, no matter how good of a deal you can get, and you'll see why in a second. Now, finally, the iPhone 16, which is arguably the worst one you could buy right now. Not because it's worse than the others, it's quite the opposite, frankly. The issue is that it costs significantly more while barely offering any more value than the 15 and the 16e, whilst also being much worse than the base 17 that starts at 256GB memory for the same price as the 16 at 256, which you can't even buy because of this reason. So it pretty much makes no sense to buy an iPhone 16. However, if you can get a used one for sub 500 or let's say 550 in most ideal condition, it's still gonna be a good phone for years to come, just not something I'd look for on purpose. That said, what are some phones you should be actively looking at? As an all-arounder, I'd recommend the 15 Pro. In 2026, this is the clear budget winner. Yes, it's a couple of years old at this point, but because of its chip, it still performs like a modern flagship. Not to mention that you also get Pro cameras and a 120Hz display with solid battery life. And because it was the first wave of a lighter titanium design, it is genuinely comfortable to use all day, unlike the newer, heavier models. But the biggest advantage of the 15 Pro is value. You can get a basically new one from Apple themselves, for less than what a new iPhone 16 costs. Except the 15 Pro is much better. And by the way, when it comes to refurbished by Apple, there is pretty much no difference from buying a new one whatsoever, so there's nothing to be afraid of. I myself have been buying refurbished Apple products for many years in the past, and I've always got Apple's premium experience with them. So the 15 Pro is the sweet spot if you're on a budget. On the used market, you can get it for even cheaper, and it still has a few good years of updates ahead of it. As for older Pro models, I wouldn't buy a 14 Pro anymore. By the time you're watching this, there are simply better options in terms of value. I understand wanting to save money or having a tighter budget, but if that's your case, I probably wouldn't recommend an iPhone altogether. Now, let's talk about the 16 Pro, because this one comes with a big asterisk. I only recommend the 16 Pro if you find a really good deal on it. Here's the rule of thumb I would use. If you can find a 16 Pro for basically the same price as a new 15 Pro or maybe up to $50 more, sure, then it becomes interesting. You'll get something a little newer with some small camera improvements here and there, but if the 16 Pro is clearly more expensive than the 15 Pro, the value starts to fall apart pretty fast. So the 16 Pro is only for deal hunters. Now, before we talk about the best option, let's quickly discuss the 17 Pro. This is basically the ball-in option on this list, but I want to be very specific about who should get this one. You don't buy the 17 Pro because you need it, you buy it when you basically have no budget and you are choosing between the 17 Pro and the 17 Pro Max. In that case, the 17 Pro is the one I would recommend for most people because you get the same top-tier camera system in a smaller and lighter body that's much easier to use with one hand. Also, you get essentially Pro Max battery life. The 17 Pro will outlast anything you'll throw at it for the whole day. That's why there's no reason to get the 17 Pro Max. You'll have to charge both by the end of the day regardless. So if you want all the Pro features without a brick in your pocket, the 17 Pro is the one you should get. However, for most people in 2026, the absolute best iPhone you can and should get is the regular iPhone 17. And here's why. The 17 finally fixes the biggest problem that a base model had for years, and that is the screen. With the base 17, you finally get a 120Hz panel, so the whole phone feels much smoother in a way older base iPhones simply do not. This one feature single-handedly narrows the gap between the Pro and the base model, and it's the most noticeable one too. You genuinely won't feel like you bought the cheap iPhone, because this is the closest the baseline has ever been to the Pro. And besides the display, you also get strong performance, plenty of RAM, so apps stay in memory longer, making the phone feel even smoother, as well as very solid camera with battery life that will not have you hunting for a charger in the afternoon. Also, because the chip and the RAM are finally in a good place, it doesn't use the last year's Pro chip anymore, this thing is set up to last. So if you're the type of person who keeps their phone for 4 or 5 years, the base 17 is built exactly for that.